The auction room went dead silent the second Grant Whitmore lowered the gavel and pointed straight at the woman holding the water tray. Who exactly let catering wander onto the bidding floor? He said it with that polished country club smile rich people use when they want to humiliate somebody without technically raising their voice. And I swear you could actually hear a few people chuckle into their champagne glasses. The crazy part is, the woman he was mocking, Lena Hart, wasn't even supposed to be serving drinks that night. She was there because the Marston Gallery had been short-staffed during a private estate auction in downtown Boston. One of those invite-only events where everyone acts like they're in a movie about old money and generational wealth. You know the type, gray-haired collectors pretending they care about history, while fighting over paintings worth more than most people's houses. Lena had just finished graduate work in art restoration 3 months earlier, buried under student loans, surviving on temporary museum contracts, basically invisible to the exact people who claimed they were preserving culture. And honestly, invisible was how those people liked it. Because the second someone without status speaks up in a room built on status, everybody gets uncomfortable. That's exactly what happened that night. The painting on display was supposedly a lost 18th century piece by Etienne Delacroix. This legendary French portrait artist collectors practically worshipped. Bidding had already climbed past $940,000 and climbing fast, paddles going up every few seconds, whispers bouncing across the room, people pretending not to sweat while gambling $1 million on a rectangle of paint. Lena had spent the entire evening trying not to attract attention, carrying sparkling water, replacing glasses, keeping her eyes down, until she noticed the brushwork near the bottom edge of the frame. Now here's where things get weird, because according to people who knew her, Lena had this almost obsessive eye for restoration details. Tiny inconsistencies bothered her the way crooked picture frames bother normal people. She once spent 2 hours in a museum pointing out microscopic pigment differences nobody else could even see. So when she froze in front of that Delacroix painting, she wasn't guessing. Something genuinely felt wrong. She leaned closer, trying not to make it obvious, and the longer she looked, the more her expression changed. Not confused, disturbed. Like somebody hearing a familiar song played slightly off-key. The varnish layering didn't match the age. The cracking patterns looked artificial. And the brush pressure in the lower right corner completely contradicted Delacroix's known technique. It wasn't maybe fake wrong. It was impossible wrong. Lena raised her hand at first, polite, hesitant. Nobody noticed. Why would they? To those people she was furniture with a pulse. Then she stepped forward, and that's when Grant stopped the auction. The room turned toward her all at once, and man, if you've never seen wealthy people collectively decide someone doesn't belong, it's almost impressive. Every face changes in exactly the same way. Their smiles tighten, their posture shifts. Suddenly, everybody becomes very interested in protecting the atmosphere. Evelyn Royce, biggest bidder in the room, widow of some tech billionaire, famous for buying art just to keep museums from getting it, slowly turned in her chair and looked Lena up and down like she'd tracked mud across a white carpet. "Is this serious?" she asked Grant, not Lena, because acknowledging Lena directly would have implied equality. That little detail matters more than people think. Humiliation at that level is never accidental. It's ritualistic. One guy near the back laughed into his whiskey. Another muttered, "Maybe the bartender's an art critic now." And the thing that really got me watching footage later wasn't even the insults. It was how comfortable everybody seemed while doing it. Like they'd done this before. Like excluding people was part of the entertainment. Grant took one slow breath, tapped the gavel against the podium, and said, "Miss, security can escort you out once you've collected your things." Real smooth, real rehearsed. He thought the room would move on. But Lena didn't move. She just stood there holding the tray with one hand and staring at the painting. Then she said something that completely shifted the energy in the room. "Before I leave," she said quietly, "tilt the light 45 degrees from the left side." That was it. No speech. No dramatic accusation. Just one technical request. And somehow that made everybody even angrier. Because confidence without permission terrifies people who rely on hierarchy. Grant actually laughed a little under his breath. "We are in the middle of a private sale," he said. "I know," Lena answered, calm as hell. "That's why you should do it now." You could feel the tension instantly. Nobody likes a person who refuses to act embarrassed when they're supposed to. That's the social contract in rooms like that. If the powerful mock you, you leave quietly so everyone can stay comfortable. Lena broke the script. And honestly, that's the moment people started hating her. Not because she interrupted the auction, because she refused to shrink. A security guard near the door took a few steps forward, probably expecting this to end quickly, but before he got there, an older man stood up from the third row. Professor Daniel Mercer. Gray suit, wire glasses, looked like somebody's tired grandfather until he opened his mouth. He'd been silent the entire evening, just watching. "Adjust the light," he said. Not loud, not emotional, just firm enough that people listened. Grant hesitated. You could actually see him calculating the optics in real time. Refuse, and he looks defensive. Agree, and he risks legitimizing her. So after this awkward little pause, he nodded at an assistant. The standing lamp beside the painting shifted left. 45 degrees. And that's when the entire room changed. The first thing people noticed was the surface texture. Under direct light, the painting looked fine, expensive, historic, believable. But angled light exposed depth inconsistencies immediately. The craquelure, those tiny age cracks old paintings develop over centuries, suddenly looked too uniform, too intentional, like somebody had manufactured history instead of letting time create it naturally. Then came the shadows. Real oil layering bends light subtly because old pigments settle differently over decades. This one reflected sharply in certain spots, especially around the lower corner. Synthetic compounds. Modern compounds. Somebody near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another collector lowered his paddle so slowly it almost looked involuntary. Lena stepped closer now, no longer apologizing for existing. "The underpainting is modern titanium white," she said, pointing near the edge. Delacroix died before that pigment was commercially available. And listen, you could physically feel the room collapse after that sentence. Because there's no debating chemistry. Rich people love opinions, but they hate facts they can't buy their way around. Evelyn Royce stopped smiling completely. Grant looked like somebody had unplugged him from the wall. One bidder quietly pulled out his phone and started searching something, probably hoping this nightmare still had an escape hatch. It didn't. Professor Mercer walked toward the display wall beside Lena and folded his hands behind his back. "Ms. Hart completed her thesis on European forgery detection last spring," he said. "She has already assisted in identifying multiple fraudulent attributions currently under review by federal investigators." Nobody laughed after that. Funny how fast status changes once credentials enter the conversation. 5 minutes earlier she was the help. Now suddenly people were avoiding eye contact like they'd accidentally insulted a surgeon holding a scalpel over their chest. Grant still held the auction gavel, but it looked ridiculous now, like a prop from a play everybody stopped believing in. He tried to speak twice before words finally came out. "Will, pause the bidding pending verification." Pending verification. That's corporate language for, "we are absolutely screwed." And the wildest part? Lena didn't look triumphant. She looked disappointed. Like this wasn't some heroic movie moment for her. It was exhausting. Because people who actually know what they're talking about usually spend half their lives fighting to be heard by people with louder titles. The room slowly dissolved into nervous conversations, collectors whispering behind raised hands, assistants rushing around pretending they still had control of the situation. One woman walked straight out without saying a word. Another demanded her driver bring the car immediately. The illusion had cracked, and once wealthy people realized they may have been conned publicly, they scatter like roaches when kitchen lights come on. But the part nobody in that room understood yet, this wasn't just an embarrassing mistake. This was the beginning of a federal fraud investigation that would destroy careers, expose fake provenance networks stretching across 3 states, and turn one arrogant sentence. Who let the help into the room? Into the quote people repeated for years every time they talked about the downfall of Whitmore auctions. Now let me pause the story for a second, because what happened in that auction room actually says a lot about how power works in elite spaces, and honestly, once you notice this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Private clubs, corporate offices, HOA boards, luxury real estate meetings, even neighborhood committees where somebody suddenly acts like they're the king of suburban America because they control parking permits and mailbox paint colors. This is a psychological trap people fall into when status becomes more important than competence. Grant Whitmore didn't dismiss Lena because he carefully evaluated her expertise and found it lacking. No, he dismissed her because her clothing, job title, and social position violated the image his brain associated with authority. According to standard procedure in high-value art authentication, concerns about provenance or restoration inconsistencies are actually supposed to trigger immediate review protocols, especially before a sale crosses major financial thresholds. But social environments built around prestige often ignore procedure the second somebody low status raises the concern. That's where ego starts overriding risk management. And trust me, that happens constantly in HOA disputes too. I've seen board presidents ignore legitimate legal complaints simply because they came from younger homeowners, renters, or people they considered beneath them socially. From a legal perspective, Whitmore Auctions was already standing on thin ice the moment they attempted to remove someone who raised a credible authenticity concern during an active transaction. Once money changes hands under potentially fraudulent representation, liability expands fast. Civil exposure, licensing issues, fraud investigations, consumer protection statutes, all of it. But psychologically, the really dangerous thing was the group behavior. Nobody wanted to defend Lena because the room had unconsciously agreed she was outside the social hierarchy. This is why public humiliation becomes contagious in wealthy environments. People protect status first, truth second. And the lesson here is, expertise doesn't always arrive wearing an expensive suit. Sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one quietly refilling your water glass, while everybody else is too busy performing importance to notice the disaster unfolding right in front of them. By the next morning, the story had already started leaking into collector circles, and if you know anything about wealthy people, you know gossip moves through them faster than Wi-Fi in a tech office. Nobody wanted to say publicly that they'd almost dropped $1 million on a fake painting. So at first the conversation stayed private. Encrypted texts, quiet phone calls between dealers, assistants suddenly rescheduling appointments, lawyers waking up way earlier than usual. But panic has a smell to it, and once enough rich people start panicking at the same time, everybody notices. Whitmore Auctions tried controlling the damage immediately. They released this painfully polished statement claiming routine authentication questions had emerged regarding the Delacroix attribution and that the company was conducting further analysis. Which sounded professional until you realized they had literally tried to throw the woman identifying the forgery out of the room 10 minutes before. That detail spread everywhere. Because people can forgive mistakes, they love mistakes, actually. What they don't forgive is arrogance. Especially public arrogance. And Grant Whitmore had handed the public a perfect villain moment wrapped in a designer tuxedo. Meanwhile, Lena went back to her apartment in Somerville that night, changed into sweatpants, microwaved leftover Thai food, and ignored 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. That part always gets me. While millionaires were scrambling to save reputations, she was sitting cross-legged on a second-hand couch eating reheated noodles under flickering kitchen lights. Real life never looks cinematic when you're inside it. According to one of her former classmates, Lena genuinely thought the whole thing might just disappear after the auction got suspended. She underestimated how badly powerful people needed someone to blame. Because the second investigators started examining the painting, things got ugly fast. The titanium white pigment alone was catastrophic. Then came infrared imaging, varnish sampling, canvas fiber analysis. Every test made the situation worse. Within 72 hours, federal investigators subpoenaed acquisition records connected to the Delacroix piece. And here's where the story shifted from embarrassing to criminal. The provenance documents, the ownership trail supposedly tracing the painting back to a French estate collection, had inconsistencies dating back nearly 14 years. Signatures mismatched. Restoration logs duplicated language from unrelated archives. One customs declaration contained a registration number tied to an entirely different artwork sold in Belgium back in 2011. Somebody had built this forgery carefully, but not carefully enough. And the deeper investigators dug, the uglier the pattern became. 3 additional works previously sold through Whitmore Auctions suddenly came under review. Then 6. Then 11. Collectors who had spent years showing those paintings off in private galleries started quietly pulling them off walls before guests could ask questions. One hedge fund manager allegedly removed an entire dining room installation overnight after hearing rumors federal agents were expanding the investigation. Imagine spending millions trying to look sophisticated only to realize your masterpiece might have been assembled in a warehouse by some guy with synthetic varnish and a heat gun. Brutal. Grant Whitmore, meanwhile, entered full damage control mode. He stopped appearing publicly almost immediately. Staff members were instructed not to discuss Lena Hart under any circumstances. Internal emails later revealed executives were terrified she'd become the face of the scandal, which, ironically, guaranteed she became exactly that. News outlets love stories where class arrogance backfires, especially American audiences. We are psychologically addicted to watching entitled people underestimate quiet experts. It scratches something primal in our brains. And Lena, whether she wanted it or not, became symbolic overnight. But here's what most people missed. She wasn't enjoying any of this. Fame tied to public humiliation feels weird, especially when you're naturally introverted. Every interview request reminded her that an entire room full of wealthy strangers had laughed at her before suddenly deciding she mattered. That kind of emotional whiplash messes with people. Professor Mercer checked on her constantly during those first few days. He'd known her since graduate school and apparently understood something important early on. Public vindication doesn't magically erase private exhaustion. One evening they met at this tiny cafe near Cambridge, the kind with mismatched chairs and overeducated customers typing novels nobody finishes. Mercer slid a folder across the table toward her. "You should read this before investigators contact you again," he said. Inside were copied authentication reports connected to prior Whitmore sales. Lena flipped through them slowly, and after maybe 30 seconds, her expression changed. "These signatures are copied," she murmured. Mercer nodded. "That's what I was afraid of." See, this is where the deeper motive finally emerged. Whitmore Auctions hadn't simply made one reckless mistake. They'd created a system where nobody wanted to challenge profitable narratives. Junior analysts stayed quiet because promotions depended on loyalty. Collectors stayed quiet because public doubt hurts resale value. Experts stayed quiet because elite institutions blacklist inconvenient people all the time. This is a psychological trap rich ecosystems fall into constantly. Once enough money enters the room, truth becomes socially expensive. And Lena, completely by accident, had interrupted the illusion at the worst possible moment. Federal agents officially raided Whitmore's archival offices 9 days after the auction. Financial records, authentication files, private communications, everything got seized. Reporters camped outside the building before sunrise. One camera crew caught Grant leaving through a side entrance wearing sunglasses even though it was raining, which honestly felt like the universe mocking him personally. The internet destroyed him. Memes spread everywhere. "Who let the help into the room?" got printed onto coffee mugs, t-shirts, reaction gifs. Somebody edited dramatic violin music over footage of the auction pause, and it racked up 4 million views in 2 days. But beneath the jokes, serious damage was happening. Investors pulled partnerships. Insurance carriers initiated independent reviews. Luxury estates canceled future consignments. Once trust disappears in the art world, everything collapses because value there is mostly belief wearing a price tag. Evelyn Royce tried distancing herself immediately. Publicly, she claimed she'd always had reservations about the Delacroix piece, which was hilarious considering she'd been bidding like her life depended on it 30 minutes before the scandal exploded. That's another thing power does. It rewrites memory in real time. Nobody wants to remember themselves as gullible, especially wealthy people who built identities around having superior taste. A month into the investigation, investigators traced several forged provenance documents back to a restoration consultant named Victor Hale, a guy known privately in collector circles for producing miracle discoveries. Turns out his miracles involved fabricated ownership histories and manipulated restoration assessments. Hale vanished before formal charges were announced. To this day, some people claim he fled to Argentina. Others swear he's still working quietly through intermediaries in New York. Honestly, could be either. The art market attracts brilliant weirdos and elegant criminals in roughly equal numbers. Through all this chaos, Lena kept trying to return to normal life. She took temporary consulting jobs, avoided television interviews, ignored social media as much as possible. But the world had already decided who she was now. Museums began contacting her privately for authentication reviews. Insurance firms requested consultations. University departments invited her to lecture about forgery detection. Suddenly, the exact institutions that previously overlooked her were competing for her attention. Funny how expertise becomes visible the second wealthy people lose money. Then came the phone call that changed everything. About 6 weeks after the auction disaster, the Aldrich Museum contacted her directly. Unlike Whitmore auctions, the Aldrich actually understood the catastrophe they'd narrowly avoided. Their board chair requested a private meeting. Lena almost declined at first, assuming it would just be another awkward apology wrapped in corporate language. Instead, she walked into a conference room overlooking the harbor and found 7 board members waiting quietly beside a stack of authentication reports. No champagne, no smugness, no performance. Just nervous professionals trying very hard not to repeat somebody else's mistake. The board chair, Margaret Vane, got straight to the point. "Ms. Hart," she said, "our institution relied too heavily on reputation and not enough on verification. We'd like to correct that." Then she offered Lena the position nobody in that auction room would have imagined 6 weeks earlier. Director of a newly formed authentication oversight panel with full independent authority over acquisitions and restoration reviews. Complete autonomy. Direct reporting access to the board. Expanded forensic budget. Total lighting control for examinations. That last detail made Lena laugh for the first time in weeks. A real laugh, too. Not one of those exhausted fake ones people use during stressful conversations. Margaret noticed immediately. "I take it lighting matters," she said carefully. Lena leaned back in her chair, looked around the room for a second, and answered with the driest sarcasm imaginable. "You'd be amazed how many expensive lies fall apart under decent lighting." Silence hit the room for maybe 2 seconds. Then everybody started laughing. Not at her this time. With her. Big difference. She accepted the offer before leaving the building. Grant Whitmore surrendered his auctioneer license 3 months later without contesting the investigation findings. Several civil lawsuits followed. Insurance claims exploded across multiple states. A confidential settlement was reportedly reached involving collectors who purchased disputed works through affiliated dealers. Publicly, Whitmore disappeared. Some said he moved to Florida. Others claimed Europe. Nobody really knew. And honestly, once people like that lose status, society stops tracking them with the same obsession it once celebrated them. That's the transactional cruelty of prestige culture. Admiration lasts exactly as long as usefulness. But the final moment of this story, the one people still talk about, happened nearly a year later during Lena's first major acquisition review at the Aldrich Museum. A multi-million-dollar Renaissance piece had arrived for examination. Collectors, curators, attorneys, donors, another crowded room full of expensive confidence. Lena entered carrying a file folder and quietly walked toward the display wall. Conversations softened immediately. No one interrupted her. No one questioned why she was there. She studied the painting for maybe 10 seconds before calmly saying, "Shift the light 45 degrees left." And this time, the entire room moved instantly. No laughter, no sarcasm, just silence and obedience.